Hey,
Barry, how are you?
How are you? Nice to
Doing
see you
well,
guys.
thank you. Yeah, what a pleasure. What a pleasure. So I'm going to go ahead and let you know we're already recording. That's how we like to do it here at Shirts and Ties. Just get into the conversation right away because we don't want to miss anything you say because it's all going to be genius, no doubt about that. So
Well,
welcome to the show.
he was
my
talking to me
pleasure.
when he said that, and he just, I appreciate Casey.
As
Thank
long
you.
as there's one genius among us, everything is cool.
I know most days we're looking around for that guy.
It's really something. You spend 30 years building up knowledge that you dispense in 10 minutes.
Yes, yes.
That's exactly it. I do want to tell you though. So Barry, I have actually been a fan of yours for probably 2 decades now. I have this quote that I say often, and now I'm starting to wonder if I stole it from you. The quote is, "The key to life is low expectations."
Not quite.
You say the key is
Happiness is low expectation.
That's right. And so when I saw you say that, I'm like, wait a second, that's very close to what I say. So the key to happiness is low expectations.
Casey has been claiming that as his own, and so the fact that it's not coming from his intelligence makes me so happy.
I mean, I've made it my own. Isn't that part of the process? Make it your own?
Absolutely.
All right. Let's get into some questions so that the smartest person here actually gets a chance to talk. Your body of work covers a lot of things, but one of them is incentives. And so I'm going to ask you a question that might get me in a little trouble here. I don't know if that makes me a canny outlaw or not. Usually not, but we have struggled to get students to do their best on standardized tests. And so what we've decided recently is to incentivize the test, to offer the opportunity for prizes, rewards, things like that if students show up, try their hardest, whatever that means, show growth or proficiency.
Mhm.
Based on all of your research, is that a good approach to trying to get students to do their best on standardized tests?
So it seems like a simple question. It's actually a complicated one. In principle, it's not a good idea, I would say. In practice, given the state of educational institutions, it may really be the finger in the dike, the best you can do. You want kids to care about how well they perform in the class and how well they understand, and to take their work seriously. If you're operating in an environment in which none of that is feasible, then dangling a pizza or something is the emergency alternative. And
Mm.
so I have great sympathy for people who rely on this, as long as they understand that this is not a magic bullet, it's a Band-Aid.
Mm.
And the bigger project, which is creating educational environments where people want to be and want to be doing the things that they're supposed to be doing, that's a lifelong project. And, in my view, in this country, we mostly fail at that, and it keeps getting worse. And you see more and more of it, the higher up you go. It's reached a point now. I spent my whole life teaching in a very prestigious university setting with terrifically talented students. And over the years, as their futures seem less assured, they became more and more driven by the incentive structures that were present, either deliberately put in place or inadvertently put in place, because they didn't take being successful for granted anymore. And it really deformed a lot of what made Swarthmore College such a special place. They became so goal-oriented, less curious, less inquisitive, less open to inputs from surprising sources, because they just, they wanted to have a career and make an income and have a good life. So it kind of broke my heart in a way to see that happening to the best and the brightest, but it was. And then I came to Berkeley and teach in the business school for a few years, and again, highly selective MBA students. And it's the same thing, the first thing they do is check out what the incentive structure is and then act in a way that takes full advantage of it.
Casey started off with the question of incentives. Is it right to incentivize to get the best out of students on a test? And just Casey and I have been wrestling a lot with behaviors in schools and consequences, whether good, positive, all of that messiness. And so, is it safe to say there's a two-part question? Is it safe to say that the inverse of incentives is accountability? That sometimes students make decisions because they want to know what they'll get, or they'll make decisions because they want to know what they don't want to suffer. Is that safe to easily kind of categorize those two in that way?
Well, I would say not quite. I mean, yes, that's an important categorization, but it seems to me those are two sides of the same thing.
Okay.
They're both incentives, positive incentives, negative
Okay.
incentives. And what I'm looking for is, if you like, an incentive structure where the consequence bears an intimate relation to the activity, right? So your incentive in doing the algebra problem is to solve the problem, not to avoid getting kept after school
Sure.
and not to get the pizza, but to solve the problem so you have greater understanding and you can move on to the next problem. And so people talk about intrinsic motivation, which I don't like because it suggests that it's fun, and it isn't. A lot of the things we do to achieve excellence aren't fun. Athletes who spend 2 hours a day in the weight room are not having fun, but it's in the service of perfecting their performances, whatever that is. And so, learning your multiplication tables isn't fun, but seeing how much better you are at doing simple mathematical problems is the point. And so what we're looking for is a system where the rewards of perseverance and effort are in products of the activity itself and not in external things that get dangled in front of you.
What you're asking, or what you say there, is also pretty similar to a lot of the work that Brian and I do, which is on engagement.
Yeah.
And you have a quote that's something to the nature of that engagement is threatened by excessive choices or external or extrinsic incentives. Could you dig into that a little bit? And maybe what I'm really asking is, how do we keep students engaged in the process willingly without that?
As I said at the start, if I knew the answer to that question, I wouldn't be talking to you.
We get that a lot.
I mean, look,
Wouldn't waste my time with you schmucks.
it's a very hard question to answer, and for a variety of reasons, especially when you're operating at the institutional level. What you want is a kind of formulaic answer. What's the set of procedures that can be applied to everyone? Because you just can't customize for hundreds or thousands of kids.
Yeah, we're supposed
So
to.
I know, but that's just fantasy. The one-room schoolhouse, that's if it ever existed, it sure as hell doesn't exist anymore. So there has to be some kind of mass-produced set of structures, and there is none that will fit for everyone. So the questions that you can ask, I guess, are, is the structure that I'm putting in place getting in the way? And there's this tension between, and the book I wrote, The Paradox of Choice, is sort of about this. There's this tension between freedom and autonomy on the one hand and structure and constraint on the other. And the ideology in this country is there can never be too much freedom. So anytime there are constraints, you rip them apart and you let people find their own way. That's a recipe for catastrophe. And anyone who's raised a kid knows that. Your kids are begging you to be strict, although they don't necessarily say it in that way. And you have to find, and for one of your kids who's a risk taker, you really want to put your arms around and protect. And for the other one who's timid, you really want to give a kick in the ass. So even when you're raising a small family, it turns out there's no one size fits all. And that is certainly true when you got a bunch of strangers, 30 of them in your classroom. Everybody needs something different. I don't know that the system that we operate within makes it feasible even to contemplate that. In the university level, you're teaching 200-300 people in a class. What's the magic formula? Well, it looks like it's probably giving them grades on exams. What else can you do?
Is that potentially an ingredient to the burnout and frustration of educators? Obviously, I'm going to speak from the context of not only just public education, but also like in dealing with teachers and with parents and with students, because I think what you just said there is profound, which is our societal structure is freedom, 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 freedom. Don't ever give me any sort of guidance. And then you walk into a classroom or a school, and Casey can also attest to this, that all teachers, what do they want? Heavy, heavy structure,
Yep.
structure, structure, structure. And we even say like students can thrive in structure, but they are being told structure is prohibiting, you need freedom. And then you kind of see it kind of pulled in where parents, they want freedom on for their child, freedom to come in and tell you, well, this is what I need from you in order for my child to succeed. And so we have really these two systems colliding in public education. Is that fair?
No, that's absolutely fair. And I think the reason it's so hard to have this conversation in a productive way is that the ideology that guides us is often on one side or the other of that divide. And so people can't imagine that Aristotle was right. And what you want is the mean between excessive structure and no structure and find the sweet spot. And that's especially challenging because it's much easier to move to an extreme than it is to find the sweet middle. And the sweet middle is going to be different for every kid. But I'll give you a wonderful example from a long, long time ago. I went to graduate school at the University of Pennsylvania. It's in downtown Philadelphia in a pretty sketchy part of town. And so there were, town gown kinds of problems, and faculty and graduate students lived on the periphery of the campus, and it wasn't safe. So Penn decided that it would become a citizen of the community, and it opened, I guess you'd call it nowadays a charter school. It opened a school in cooperation with the Board of Education. And the idea was that the school was going to educate the children of faculty members, but it was also going to educate the children of the community. And so the question is, what kind of school should it be? And the answer was, it depends. From the point of view of the faculty, they wanted freedom, 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 because they took it for granted that their kids were going to learn, given the household environment they were coming from. From the point of view of the community, they wanted structure, structure, structure. They didn't take it for granted that their kids would get out of school knowing how to add and subtract and spell and read. So they wanted everything very highly structured with very clear-cut achievement standards and expectations. And the faculty community wanted essentially a Montessori school for the children of the privileged. You can't square that circle.
How did that school work out, by the way?
I don't know how it worked out over the years, but it was, I think when they set it up, they were completely oblivious that this tension would arise. So they didn't anticipate it, and they didn't have models in place for dealing with it. They figured everybody wants the same thing for the education of their kids. Wrong, wrong, wrong.
I'm going to follow up on that with something that I think is similar today, and that is this move to privatize education. And my question for you is that move to privatize education just part of the outcropping of the free market concepts, or is it a true dissatisfaction in the schooling that is occurring today?
I think it's both. One of the attractions of a free market is the diversity of tastes and interests that people have. Don't have the state impose on you the things that it thinks are best for you, because people are different and they're allowed to be different. We encourage them to be different. And as society has gotten more and more diverse, forgive me for stereotyping, but you guys live in relatively homogeneous parts of the country compared to, say, where I live. Although I must say around here it's pretty damn homogeneous too. But so how do you cater to everybody when there's so much difference? It's very hard to figure out. And so the temptation is to let people who think who have common values or common aspirations, create their own school, educate their own kids, and privatize instead of homogenizing in something that is ideal for nobody, but adequate for everybody. So, and there's also, I think, a lot. I think this kind of started with the growth of militancy and teachers' unions in the 70s, 60s, and 70s, where teachers increasingly seem to be at least publicly arguing for their own salary and benefits and, working conditions, and less focused on what was best for the kids. And that, I think, created a kind of adversarial relationship between teachers and families that hadn't previously existed. You no longer assume the best of intentions on the part of the teachers. You had to be on your guard to make sure that the teachers weren't shirking or taking advantage or anything, and so it required eternal vigilance. And that also, I think, contributed to the desire to privatize and break the grip that unions seem to have on the structure of public education. That was there was no adversarial anything when I was in elementary school. Everybody seemed to be on the same page. 15 years later, it was quite different.
Go ahead.
How has that been? I was just gonna say, so going back to the Reagan administration, then there are always reports that education is in crisis. Is that a continuation of that same conversation that you're
I don't
suggesting, or
know.
is it different?
I don't know. That may have set, this is a complicated, there are always many factors, but this might have been what set that snowball heading down the hill. And then as it rolls down the hill, it just picks up more and more snow and deviates more and more from the paths of other snowballs. And by the time you get to the bottom of the hill, you can't believe that they ever started in the same place. So that's my sense. It might have, if you have a charitable orientation at the beginning, then when things go wrong, you will assume that people are doing their best and ask, what can we do to help? And if you have a suspicious orientation at the beginning, then you're going to be protecting your interests from the get-go. And that creates, anytime something goes wrong, you put the worst possible interpretation on it and do whatever you have to do to defend your interests or your kids' interests. And at this stage, I don't know how you rewind the tape and go back to a time where the assumption that everyone was trying to achieve the same thing.
Yeah, man, this is getting into my love language, which is let's speak about things that we can't solve, but are really fun to kind of talk about because they're the 10,000 foot view. But it also is deeply frustrating. It's deeply frustrating as a parent who puts their kids in school systems when I feel like maybe the autonomy of what I think to be maybe a not seasoned or professionalism is exercised in a classroom. As a parent, I want to step in and say, you as the principal, you need more structure. You need more accountability to this teacher. And then as a principal, I get frustrated when I try to exercise autonomy or professionalism and I'm questioned. And I want, or somebody wants me to fit into the system of the larger whole. And not every principal does this, or not every teacher is doing this. And they want this and so this struggle is just, it's very intense. It's very, very real. And I do think any listener, whether you're just a teacher, just a principal, just a parent, or holistically just a human, understands this struggle of, I love structure when it aligns with what I believe, but the second
Yep.
structure is not what I believe, I want autonomy.
It doesn't even feel like structure when it aligns with what you believe. It simply is the way the world
It's
is,
common
right?
sense. This is how the way the world should work. And the second it's outside of that, now it's restriction and
Yep.
it's conflict.
And it's, by the way, not just true in education. The same sort of thing has occurred, in my view, when it comes to healthcare. The paternalistic physician is no longer the acceptable model in the US. Physicians make proposals about what you might do, and it's for you to decide. And, nobody liked the paternalistic physician very much. On the other hand, you really don't want to be in a position where you're determining whether you live or die based on, essentially complete ignorance. And so this notion of joint decision making between the physician and the patient is a wonderful idea, but it's also incredibly abstract. What exactly does that mean? Joint decision making. What is a doctor supposed to do when the patient is making a choice that the doctor knows is going to be
Well, according to
catastrophic?
Google, doctor, this is what I should be doing, right? Well, here's I want to bring this down just slightly, and here's my question to you then. Can you speak into, because we will gravitate probably towards one or the other all throughout the day, right? Like we at times gravitate towards structure, we at times gravitate towards autonomy. Can you give me a delineation between, like, when you desire one or the other, here's the dangers. When you rely heavily on structure, here's a danger. But also, if you rely heavily on choice, here's a danger. Are you able to kind of condense that quickly?
I think so. The danger of too much structure is that you will inhibit, or you might inhibit, the kinds of curiosity and desire to learn, to achieve mastery, that is your ultimate objective as an educator. Because if the structure that you impose doesn't align well with the interests and engagement of the student, you're just going to turn the student off. You know, I'll learn after school. During school is just for behaving myself, and after school is when I'll learn, and then who knows what you'll learn. So that's the danger of structure. You wedge kids into your model, it doesn't fit their model, and you lose something, enormous resource that they bring to the enterprise. On the other hand, if you don't provide structure, learning is work. Learning is hard. You have to be willing to put up with failure and, go past it, drive through it. You have to be willing to trust that this work that you're doing now that really seems mind numbing is an essential ingredient in the kind of enlightenment aha that you're going to get further down the road. And you're not going to, as a kid, you're not going to find that on your own. You're going to have it imposed on you by someone. So the danger of too much freedom is sort of intellectual anarchy. And the danger of too much structure is just completely demotivating students. Which is a worse danger? I think the answer to that depends. With some kids, it's the freedom part that's the real problem, and with other kids, it's the structure part, and that's why it's so hard to design a system that suits everybody. You could, for example, set up a classroom where the incentive, if you like, is learning activities that you are freed up to engage in after you have done, mastered whatever the lessons are. So it's not a pizza and it's not a sweatshirt. It's a chance to do educational activities that you really groove to. That seems to me to be more internal to the process of education. And who would think that you can pay kids off for doing their learning work well by giving them more learning work to do? Wouldn't that be a great thing?
Well, they are doing it, right? To your point earlier, they go home and they learn on their own, only it's just not the things that maybe we think are valuable or that we want. But their reward of getting through the day is that they go home and they learn more. It's just
Yeah, but it's I think it's not just that. It's the other problem, and this I have also seen happening in the digital age. You see teachers who acknowledge it's really hard to get kids to pay sustained attention to things. So you have to provide what they're getting in small bites. Okay, so the question is, where does this sustained attention come from? My view is that it's a muscle. The way you strengthen the muscle is by stressing it. So the way you build up sustained attention is by demanding that kids pay sustained attention. And giving them a TED Talk to watch instead of having them read an article or a whole book, God forbid, is not building up that muscle. And so the result is that, yes, you keep them engaged because you're giving them short, entertaining bites, but the world is too complicated to be understood in short, entertaining bites. And when they need more, they don't have it because you've failed in your responsibility of building up that muscle. And I've seen that also happening at every level of education. Kids go to college, they've never read a whole book. The teacher will assign Act 4 of Hamlet, because you can't expect high school kids to read a 5-act play. So we'll just read Act 4, and then I'll provide what comes before and what comes after, something like that. So that's just giving up. And, our deep responsibility is to cultivate these abilities that kids can then use when they leave school and at the end of the day to learn the stuff that they're really interested in. If we're not giving them the tools and we're not giving them the content, what the hell are we giving them? And the world is not set up these days to develop this sustained attention on its own. Every now and then you'll see a kid who just gets completely captivated with coding. And, a 9-year-old kid is doing all this unbelievable stuff on the computer, and no one has to tell this kid that you got to stick with it. It's hard, hours and hours go into it because it captivates the kid, and the kid just figures out on his or her own that this is how you deal with complicated problems. You put your whole self into them and you stick with it. But mostly, the distractions are so omnipresent that all it takes is one little glitch on your path to solving a problem, and you're playing a video game or you're, listening to Spotify or what have you. The number of distractions is limitless. And at the very least, we can teach kids how to stay on task so that when they do the learning they're really interested in, when the school day is over, they actually can make progress on things that are worth making progress on.
I want to take what you just said and add it to an issue that comes up again and again, both on this show and elsewhere, which is the concept of anxiety. And Barry, I don't think you've written about anxiety,
No, I
have
haven't.
you? But here's my question for you, because I do think it connects a little bit to the paradox of choice. I wonder if this feeling of anxiety that our students, our young people are having is tied to the fact that they have so much choice in the inputs that they're receiving, whether it's I can click through this video right away and get to the new one, or even the introduction of computers into the classroom where they're switching from one
Yeah.
thing to the next all the time. Do you think that maybe that paradox of choice is also contributing to anxiety that we're seeing in kids today?
I absolutely do, although I think, anxiety is a very big umbrella kind of concept. So, there is the anxiety about am I going to succeed? But there's a deeper anxiety, which is what is it that I'm supposed to succeed at? And the choice problem, I think, contributes to that anxiety. I'm not worried about I'm good in school. I'm not worried, but am I doing the right stuff in school? What's the point? There are so many different directions I could go in. And there's this expression that's become a common term in our lingo, FOMO. There's always You're always dangling in front of you is the possibility that there's a better opportunity right around the corner that you should have your eyes open to. And when life was simpler, that wasn't the case, and now it is. And it's all at your fingertips. It's all, connected to your keyboard or your phone. And so there's not even any barrier to entry. It's right there and perpetually there. And the it is almost the whole universe. That little device that you have in your pocket connects you to everything in the world. So whatever you're doing, it's easy to imagine that there's something better out there that you're not doing. And it seems to me that does it really unsettles people a lot.
Will you allow me, the two of you, to flesh something out? Because Barry, you just said something that kind of maybe clarified a thought. You said, by Casey's question prompting, there's anxiety because we don't know our students don't know how to succeed. And I'm going to actually encompass like adults in this as well, right? So this is just people, right?
Yep,
And teens will feel it exponentially, but how to succeed and we don't know what to be successful at causes
yep,
anxiety. Okay. And I
yep.
appreciate that immensely. My next step, and I'm going to ask the two of you to kind of speak into this, does it make sense or am I faulting? If that's the anxiety piece, I don't know how to be successful and I don't know what to be successful at. We then, if we are not exercising these muscles of doing hard things with and allowing for structure, and if we pursue this, I want free choice in all things without any pushback. If we go down that line and we don't know what to be successful at, I'm assuming we will choose things that are easy, things that are give us kind of instant gratification. And if you do those things, you're not accomplishing hard tasks. You're not overcoming difficulty, which there's a sense of gratification when you overcome something,
Yep.
when you see growth. But also, typically, that will lend to you doing what makes you feel good all the time and not considering the perspectives or the needs of others. And so, I would say if you have this anxiety, you don't know how to learn or how to be successful or what to be successful at, you choose selfish and easy things, that then leads to depression. What have you done that is worth value in
Yep.
your own life or to somebody else? Does that lineage of thinking make sense?
It could happen, but that, the thing that's built into the scenario you just presented is that there's some part of you that somehow recognizes that the things you're pursuing are not the things you should be pursuing. And what worries me is that our standards for what counts as a worthwhile activity get degraded. So it doesn't feel like we're doing anything wrong when we're seeking instant gratification and personal gratification. That's the way the world is. That's what everybody around us is doing. And this notion that we have a higher purpose, say, or we should be taking the long view just slowly disintegrates. So the result is that people will, in fact, not take on worthwhile challenges and not worry about their development, but it also may not bother them because that seems to be the way the world is going.
Well, they don't have time to consider that it's not bothering them because they're just going to the next thing.
To the next thing, and, I'm an old man, and I hate to sound like, the good old days were the good old days, but that is certainly strikes me as what I see around me in young people. They either get so tunneled that they don't ask themselves what this thing that I'm doing has to do with a larger world, or they flit from thing to thing, virtually guaranteeing that nothing they do will ever really be consequential. And here's the other thing, as I'm sure you know, life is hard and life is complicated. And thinking that you can come up with easy solutions to complicated problems is very delusional. But if the only tools you have are tools that lead to simple solutions, you will oversimplify the world and oversimplify the problems you're having with the world and oversimplify your approach to solving those problems. You know, the best conversation stopper you can use in a conversation is to begin your remarks by saying, well, it's complicated. As soon as you say that, you've lost whoever it is you're talking to. And you can certainly see that in the political debates that are going on in this country these days. Nobody wants an answer that begins with, it's complicated.
Well, they don't mind it as long as the next sentence says, but I've found the solution and it's simple.
Well, maybe, but even then they're going to tell you it's simple,
Yeah.
you
Yep.
idiot. What's wrong with you? How can you not see how simple the answer to this problem is? So I don't think, it certainly is better when you say it's complicated and I have the right view, but much better is it's simple, moron, open your eyes.
Yeah. People love
And
that. They love that sentence.
that's sort of what political discourse has become. And it's partly that we insist on making complicated things simple so that we don't have to put time and effort into figuring out hard things.
I do wonder so one of the challenges of public education now is that transition into university, if that's the plan for that student, and universities having to look back at public education and whatever data there is from that and determine if this child is the right fit for that school, if they're going to be successful. But here's my question. Do K through 12 schools have an obligation to compile data while considering universities? In other words, should we, as we're making decisions on grades and things like that, should we be thinking about, well, what impact is this going to have on the child getting into university, or should we just focus on the learning?
I think it's unrealistic to say just focus on the learning. The preparatory schooling that kids get is integrated or should be integrated with their overall schooling. So it's unfortunate that this is sort of creates a top-down system. The highest level of the educational structure basically is the piper calling the tune, and then everything lower down has to provide them with the inputs that they think they want. And sometimes it can be so obtrusive that it really distorts what you think you should be doing in elementary school or even in high school. So I'm not a huge fan of this structure. And what makes me particularly upset by it is that the competition for getting into college is itself incredibly counterproductive. Stanford brags that it rejects 97% of applicants. Now, what percentage of those rejected applicants do you think would do fine at Stanford? I would guess close to 100% of them. There's a lot of self-selection. Everybody who applies is a fine student. They could do it by lottery. And if they did it by lottery, then the kind of data that the high schools have to provide to Stanford would no longer be so necessary because, you've got this, you say yes or no to every applicant, and then you throw all the yeses into a hat and you pick them randomly. You don't need to make fine distinctions between A plus and A plus plus students. So you put an enormous burden on the high school, which in turn puts an enormous burden on the students who find themselves in competition with one another instead of learning cooperatively so that they can all, when they try to get into Stanford or Harvard or whatever, they can leave their good friends in the dust. And it adds nothing to education, and it interferes with a lot of education, and it's for no purpose. So in that sense, I hate the idea that universities are basically dictating to the lower level schools what they have to provide in the way of credentials. And it can be distorting, you know. Um, Kids learn they have to do 53 different extracurricular activities to look impressive. So what do? They spend 5 minutes on each one. So, they've got a resume that looks like this, and the admissions people can probably see right through them, but then you hire somebody to advise you on the shaping of your application so that you can try to fool the admissions people into thinking that you're actually committed to each of these extracurricular activities. And then the admissions people get more sophisticated in finding the fakes, and it's like this arms race where all of the effort, energy, and money is wasted, and everyone's running in place, but they don't feel like they're running in place. But I don't know that a high school can ever say, "Nope, we're just not gonna do that. We're gonna do
That's
we're gonna do written evaluations of our students. There's not gonna be grades. We know each student well, and it's up to you, university, to extract something useful from these written evaluations that we're gonna send you." Who's gonna do that?
So, Barry, I'm going to take advantage of this situation. So, Brian and I both have seniors in high school. I'm going to bring in one of the great psychologists of all time, and I'm going to make it about me, very Western of me. And I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about my daughter. So, first of all, she wants to be a psychologist, right? Which I think is amazing. She has an aptitude for it. But here's really what my question is. We're at that point now where she's applying to universities and things like that. And really all she's done is apply to universities kind of in the area where they kind of accept everybody.
Uh-huh.
And then she applied to one university that has much higher standards, and she got in there too. She mostly did it, though, just to see. Should I care where she goes?
So, yeah, but unfortunately, that doesn't really answer your question, because if you care about where she goes, what is it that you should be caring about? And that's a lot harder question to answer. The thing about large state institutions, some of them not very selective, some of them quite selective, is that you can find your people and you can find your place. They offer a lot, and if they provide enough structure, there's a chance the kids won't get lost in a sea of 40,000 other students. So Is it possible to get a great education at Montana, University of Montana? Of course it is. Is there any reason to think that you will automatically get a better education at Yale? Of course not. But you need to know a lot about your kid and have confidence that somehow between your kid's sort of internal strength and the guidance structure at the institution, people will be looking out to make sure that your kid doesn't get lost. And you can help in that, although my experience is that the last person that kids listen to when it comes to advice is their parents. You got to get somebody else's parent to give them the advice that you were going to give them. So yes, you should care, but I think the most important thing to care about is that your kid is asking him or herself the right questions about where to go to school. It's not a sure thing. You can certainly make mistakes. One of my kids I mean, she did fine, but she did not make a good college choice, although she thought she was. She got through it fine. My oldest grandchild had a disastrous first year of college, and then COVID came, so her entire college experience was almost a complete washout. She survived, but it was sad to see her deprived of the joys of having a really rich college experience. So it's easy to make mistakes. Most mistakes you can recover from. And if you're asking the right questions, if it seems as though you're making choices for the right reasons, then you can have some confidence that this is a kid who will find her people and place at the institution. If you're making choices for the wrong reasons, then all bets are off, you know? And to me, it's the wrong reason to go to Indiana because they have the best football team in the country. As miraculous as that is, it is not the right reason to be choosing to go to Indiana.
Um, Casey, do you have any more questions as you have this?
Yeah, I mean, we need to wrap it up soon, but I want to touch on one more thing because I do want to leave with something. I mean, Brian and I talk about education as being a wicked problem because there aren't any
Yes.
answers. But the one thing that I did hear you come back to again and again, whether we were talking about raising children or knowing what to do in schools, is you have to know the kid. Would you agree then if we were going to walk away with anything from this conversation other than the camaraderie of it and really enjoying that conversation, would it be that when we make difficult decisions, the most important factor is to consider the people?
That's my view. And I think the real benefits, there's some controversy about this, the real benefits about small classrooms, in my mind, is not that you can individualize the instruction so much as it is that you actually get to know the kids. It's not just individualizing instruction, it's individualizing the motivation, it's individualizing the hand-holding that you do, it's individualizing everything. Each kid in your class is a member of your family for that year, and you have enough knowledge and insight about each kid that you can do your best with the kids in the same way you do your best with your own kids. And when you're teaching 40 kids in a classroom, that's not feasible. The smaller the classroom, the better the knowledge. The kids are different. They need to be treated differently, and the teachers need to be in a situation where that's possible to do, which means that the regs have to allow it and that the numbers have to make it so that if it's allowed, you can actually pull it off. And it's the opposite of mass production. It's, quote, inefficient. If you're looking at long-term outcomes, I would argue it's probably efficient because you're going to succeed with most of your students most of the time if that's the kind of environment you're operating. Every piece of education is education of the whole person. It is not education in math. It's not education in social studies. It's building a person. It's building a character. And the more you know about the kids you're trying to build, the better job you'll do doing the building. So I think that's a good takeaway.
Well, I'm going to put you on a spot with a tough question, but before I say that, I really loved what you just said, and I think I would like to extend it because education tends to talk about the student and get to know the students and make decisions based on the student. And I love that this isn't the most efficient way of maybe teaching, but it is the most effective because you're actually
Yep.
working with people. And I would like to extend that as a reminder to myself, but anyone, parents or principals, that also means teachers, right? Like you have to lead teachers
Yep.
in the same way that we're asking teachers to teach students, which is you can't give a system in a school that asks every teacher to do the exact same thing.
That's exactly right.
Parents need to understand that you're going to, especially when you get into the higher levels, you're going to have different teachers with different expectations. And you want that. It's frustrating for us as parents. I understand that because we have to like navigate the different expectations of a different teacher. But that is what's best for students, that when teachers have autonomy to teach in their to their strengths and to their abilities, they then can more quickly and more efficiently do that with their students. If teachers are held to strict holistic norms, they tend to do that with their students, and that's just not healthy.
No, no, I think that's right. And of course, this is a lesson for how to live your life. You know, it's not just in school that you encounter people who have different standards and different modes of operating. You need to be adaptable and flexible and meet people where they are because they're not going to be carbon copies of one another. And that's a pretty good lesson to learn when you're negotiating in school. The problem when you're managing teachers is that here again, and I know we have to end, but it's really a lot about intention. If you believe that the administrators at the school have everyone's best interests at heart, then it may not bother you that you're being treated a little bit differently than the person in the next classroom over. But if you think that you're in an adversarial relationship with the administration, then anytime you see deviation from standard operating procedure, it's going to bother you. So back in at a time when you thought everyone was aspiring to achieve the same thing, you did it your way and she did it her way, and that was fine. But in an age of suspicion and lack of trust, standardization is the insurance policy against being accused of favoritism, bias, unfairness, what have you. And again, that's the world we currently live in, is one where everyone is suspicious of almost everyone else.
So here's my question to you. I'm intentionally giving you choice. You can't land in the middle. You have to choose one or the other, and then you can have fun with it and probably explain it. But in your where you're sitting right now, this will probably say more about your personality than anything. Do you believe that excellence comes more from rules or from values?
So I can't say yes.
Yes,
I think it comes more from values.
because they will dictate the rules.
They will dictate which rules you adopt, which ones you take seriously, how seriously you take them, how you interpret them. So I think all education is values driven, and we pretend that that's not the case, because once it's values driven, then that leads to fights about whose values are the ones that should be taken seriously.
Yeah. I will tell you right now whether, and I probably can't say this on a podcast, but I appreciate that sentiment because as a principal, as much as I want to be fair in all things, I make decisions based on values. My personal values impact
Yep.
my building.
And how could it be otherwise?
Correct. Correct. Okay. How we end this, Barry? My gosh, thank you first and foremost. What a fantastic time. We end it with a takeaway. Casey and I will come with a takeaway. It's always most beneficial when we have a guest because Casey doesn't listen to a thing I say, and so he'll just say the last thing that I said.
Sure.
So and so Barry, but obviously you brought the meal, so if you want to just leave us with a parting wisdom, you're welcome to do so. But you'll have time as me and Casey kind of wrap this up.
I think we ended on a really quite central note, which is that education starts with education and values. And if you fail at that, then likely you fail. And if you succeed at that, then the rest can, adding and subtracting can probably take care of itself.
That's my takeaway, Casey.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. I'm not going to top that. I think that's fantastic. And Barry, I do want to say that I have read your work, watched your videos, and known of you and your ideas for years. And this has been an absolute pleasure. Sometimes I hate bringing on people who I have that relationship with, because sometimes they'll let you down. But you brought everything I expected plus more. So Barry, thank you so much for being a
You're
part of
very,
this.
very kind. I can't imagine students with either of you ever having their motivation flag, I gotta say.
Barry, if people wanted to know more about you, want to follow your work, where can they find you?
Just Google me. I don't have a I have no social media presence. I'm too old for that. But it turns out that if you type my name into Google, you'll find far more links than you could possibly care to know about. And all my books are available on Amazon. So
Thank you.
I'm easy to find.
We appreciate so much making the time for two schmucks out here in the Midwest or the Mountain West. So thank you so much.
Come on, Schurtz Ties. What a clever name.
Thank you, Barry.
Appreciate it.
Have a great week.
You
Take care,
too.
Barry.
Thank
We'll
you
see
so
ya.
much.